A while back, we did a video on top 10 features of classic cars that we miss most. It was a big hit with the viewers, but a number of viewers reminded me that I forgot a few features on the top 10 list, and I thought that there were another 10 that deserved at least an honorable mention that are features that we love and miss about classic cars. So let's go through that list now and begin with number 10, hidden wipers. I believe the first domestic vehicle with hidden wipers were the 1967 Pontiacs. You can see here on this 67 Bonneville that the car not only had hidden wipers, but it had butterfly wipers hinged at the outer edges of the vehicle, and they were articulating wipers that provided a better swipe pattern than normal wipers. Didn't take very long before this fad would sweep across not only the General Motors lineup, but also Ford and Chrysler. And in some cases, GM redesigned cars that it had just introduced the year before, like the 1967 Eldorado, and gave it hidden wipers by changing the hood design. Hidden wipers not only gave the car a clean look, but it was also a practical solution, as this helped prevent snow and ice buildup on wipers as well when they were tucked underneath the hood in winter weather. Perhaps the coolest application of hidden wipers was on the late 1960s, early 70s Corvettes, where a panel would raise before the wipers would activate. And this is probably the only instance that I've seen of this in a domestic car, and certainly a cool execution, albeit somewhat troublesome, again in winter and icy weather, for that panel to open up when it was frozen solid with ice. At number 9, we have cornering lights. Cornering lights were, again, kind of a fashion trend in the 1960s and into the 70s that some cars do still have today, but it's pretty infrequent. Back in the day, even through the 80s, cornering lights were a relatively frequent option, even on the lower-end vehicles, and they were quite large and helped illuminate the side of the road when you were turning. Perhaps the largest vehicle cornering lights that I can think of offhand are those found on the 1971 to 78 Eldorados, which in some cases they were so large that the punch for the die to stamp out the hole for the cornering lights left a ripple in the front fender because that hole was so large. At number 8, we have something that I really miss, and that is well-trimmed door panels. Whatever happened to door panels that actually had some nice materials on them? Nowadays, most all door panels are just some kind of blah, hard plastic that's molded, uninteresting, made up of a number of pieces that somehow just don't ever seem to quite look like they go together. But back in the day, there were plenty of well-trimmed door panels that had cloth, carpeting on the bottom edge so that you didn't scuff them, and often used soft-touch materials. This is something that I would say the cars of yesteryear certainly did better than the cars of today. Door panels looked especially rich, and this was true even into the 1980s. It was really as the 1990s came about that door panels became the area where it seemed that bean counters wanted to put as much plastic as they could all over a particular surface. Next at number 7, we have great carpet, and in some cases floor mats. Whatever happened to deep pile carpeting on vehicles, particularly luxury cars in the 1970s had this wonderful deep pile carpeting. Today, it really doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you get. You get about the same grade of mouse fur that cloaks the cabin under your feet, and none of it looks all that great. I think automakers also try to hide the poor carpet that they offer in the vehicles with ever increasingly large floor mats that cover it up, which I guess is a good strategy, but still doesn't give you that feeling under your foot of luxury that you once got. And unless you're buying a car that is north of $100,000 in base price, you're really going to get unremarkable carpets these days. And that's really a shame, because back in the 60s and 70s, even mid-price cars had some really nice carpeting in them that was quite luxurious. Next, at number 6, we have chrome trim and chrome bumpers. Today, in particular, bumpers are made out of nothing other than plastic, often fitted with radar sensors to help people park cars that they can't see out of and perhaps are not that great at driving anymore. But chrome trim back in the day and bumpers just gave the car a wonderful accent piece at the front and the rear, as well as around the daylight opening or the greenhouse of the car that really help set the car off. Nowadays, it's really only pickups that have chrome bumpers, and some cars do have the chrome trim around the daylight opening, but the use of chrome is overall much more sparing than it once was, and I think that there's some room for using more chrome on modern vehicles. Let's move to number 5 and move back to the interior, and number 5 is mechanical gauge clusters. I don't know about you viewers, but one of my most recent pet peeves is that every vehicle seemingly has some computerized set of gauges that really just doesn't have the depth or richness that some mechanical gauge clusters of yesteryear used to have. I'm not quite sure what's driving this continual fad. Maybe it's the desire to have gauge clusters that are customizable, but they really just don't look rich or expensive. Just looks like you're displaying gauges on a TV screen, which is basically what you're doing when you have a non-mechanical gauge cluster. And I wish automakers would get back to something that had some actual needles and dials and some sense of 3 dimensions as opposed to these flat 2-dimensional TV screen gauges. Next at number 4, vent windows. These were a very popular option for many years on numerous vehicles, particularly with smokers, because they could ash their cigarettes out through the vent window and not drop the whole glass to do so. But vent windows also provided a nice function in that they enabled you to get a little bit of ventilation without opening the entire window, and it was sometimes indirect ventilation depending upon how the window opened. Ford took the vent window concept to the extreme in the 1970s, introducing the mini vent windows that continued on all the way until the late 1980s on the Lincoln Town cars. And they were a really great innovation that many people liked. I don't know that they belong on every single car, but it would at least be nice to have a few vehicles that had them available. At number 3, something that a lot of us really miss, and that is bench seats, in particular comfortable bench seats. Today, every car has to have some sort of oversized center console, which is where automakers package a lot of the electronics, and these oversized center consoles really intrude on passenger space. I don't know about you, but again, bench seats are something that I wish would come back in a few vehicles, aside from pickup trucks, where they are still available in some cases, but I think a few more vehicles should have them. Moving on to number 2, and that is unintrusive automatic transmissions. Whatever happened to smooth shifting transmissions that just disappeared into the driving experience, weren't felt or heard from? You really couldn't even perceive their shifts. I think some of the best transmissions were not only the 1970s, General Motors Turbohydromatic 400 and Chrysler 727. Yes, the Ford C6 was a good transmission, but I wouldn't call it unintrusive. You certainly perceived the shifts. But even into the 90s, a number of automakers offered very smooth shifting transmissions, including the GM 4T 80E in particular that comes to mind. But nowadays, the 8, 9, 10-speed transmissions, they all seem to be very intrusive, not necessarily knowing what gear they're going into or on the hunt for a higher gear all the time. And in some cases, I actually feel that CVTs are better than the conventional automatic transmissions. I never would have thought I would have said that, and I really don't care for CVTs either. But having something that is completely unintrusive is just an anachronism from a transmission perspective, and something that I significantly miss every time I get into a modern car. And that leaves us with number 1, which is a great variety of engines to choose from, depending upon the vehicle that you selected. For instance, until the 1977 model year, most General Motors vehicles offered engines that were made by the division that produced the vehicle. So, for instance, General Motors produced a number of 454, 455 cubic inch V8s, and all were different. The Chevrolet 454, the Pontiac 455, the Olds 455, and the Buick 455 were all different from one another and really shared very few components outside of the carburetor and ignition system components. Over at Ford, the differentiation wasn't quite as great, but Ford did have the FE and MEL blocks in the 50s and 60s, and even into partway through the 1972 model year, the 460 cubic inch 385 series V8 was exclusive to Lincoln before it proliferated across the Ford and Mercury lineups. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Chrysler also had proliferated their engine choices across the lineup. But in general, there were just more engine choices to be had in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, depending upon the car that you bought. Now everything just kind of comes with a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder. Yuck. And the same engine is used in everything all the way from Chevrolets to Cadillacs. Witness, in fact, GM's 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that you could get in everything from a Chevrolet up to the Cadillac CT6, which was at the time the most expensive vehicle. It just is kind of sad that this variety is gone, and it will likely never return, mainly for cost reasons, but it's something that can allow us to appreciate cars of yesteryear. Hope you enjoyed this another Top 10 Features of Classic Cars series. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Until the next time.